You're listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, episode number 43.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey there, welcome back. Jill here, host of the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with those inevitable ups and downs related to raising healthy kids, inside and out. Many of you know I have 4 kids, and someone was bound to be picky. And I'll tell you, it was my very first child. And I will also say she wasn't that picky, but we did go through a phase of pickiness, not only related to food, but particularly related to her clothing. She was given a pink Polly Flinders dress from a relative that was purchased at a yard sale. Just a cute, great condition, little pink dress that became her absolute favorite dress to wear. In fact, when she was around 2.5, we were in that pink Polly Flinders dress every single day for a period of time. And it felt like it was forever, but it was probably 2 weeks or something like that. But let's just say we were in that dress so often, I had to sneak to wash it at night after she went to bed so that it was clean. And admittedly, I was not washing that thing every single day. So kids can be picky about their clothing. They can particularly be particular about the foods they eat as well. My daughter loved her hot dogs, and I know as a pediatric nutritionist, you're thinking, you gave her hot dogs? I held out for a very, very long time, but she received them on some excursion or party or I don't know, I can't even remember how or when, but she did, and she really liked them. And my husband happens to like them a lot too, so they became part of her diet for a little bit, along with some buttery crackers and American cheese and watermelon. That was sort of the bill of fare for quite a while. She also liked milk a lot and drank a lot of it. And as many of you might know, we had a little bout of anemia as a result of a picky diet and a lot of milk consumption. What worked? She was picky and she did enter that phase, but we weren't in it for a ton of time. And what worked for me, and this is not something that's going to work for everyone, but what worked for me was really sticking with a routine of 3 meals and scheduled snacks during the day. Mentally, my mind shift of not reacting to her limited diet, not catering to her, so not rescuing with a backup meal, incorporating those foods throughout the day, but also incorporating other foods, and just not budging on when she wouldn't eat, not getting too terribly fearful and reacting with a backup meal right away, and not bribing her. So I had the advantage of knowing all about feeding and feeding interactions and making sure that I didn't go with the whole reward bribe scenario or putting too much pressure on her to eat other foods, but to really just kind of take this picky eating phase in stride and making sure that I kept closely attuned to my job as her mom, which was to continue to expose her to a variety of foods, to continue to stay on a structure, continue to support her, and let her work her own way through it. So I bring up this story because today we're talking with Natalie Muth. She is the author of The Picky Eater Project, 6 Weeks to Happier, Healthy Meals. And she co-wrote that book with Sally Sampson, who's the editor of Chop Chop magazine. So hang tight. We are going to get into that interview very soon. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over at www.jillcastle.com/043. That's 043 for episode number 43. I'm excited to talk about picky eating today with Natalie Muth. I've known Natalie for quite some time. I met her around the time that Marianne and I published Fearless Feeding, How to Raise Healthy Eaters from High Chair to High School. After having a really nice conversation with Natalie, I was fortunate enough to be involved with her in a project with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and then later to meet her at the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo a couple of years ago in person again. So I've known Natalie for a number of years. She is the co-author, as I mentioned before, of the Picky Eater Project, 6 Weeks to Happier, Healthier Meals with Sally Sampson, the editor of Chop Chop Magazine. Now, in terms of Natalie, she's a very interesting person. She is a dual board-certified pediatrician and obesity medicine physician and a registered dietitian. So she's an RD-MD, or as she lists it, an MD-RDN. She practices general pediatrics and obesity medicine at San Diego County. She also serves as a senior advisor for healthcare solutions for the American Council on Exercise and is on the executive committee of the AAP section on obesity. She is on the adjunct faculty of UCLA Fielding School of Public Health and is a diplomat of the American Board of Obesity Medicine. She says, "My mission is to optimize the health and well-being of everyone by supporting healthy nutrition and activity environments, proactive parenting, and health-promoting policies and programs." She also walks the talk. She has a program that she has started with her husband called the Teddy Fund in honor of their son, Teddy. She gives back to the community and not only as a accessible and available pediatrician who helps children and families with a deep knowledge of nutrition as well, but she gives back as well. And the Teddy Fund the goal of that fund is to support organizations and efforts in the San Diego and Chicago areas that improve the health and well-being of babies, kids, and teens. Each year, around the time of Teddy's birthday, Natalie, Bob, Tommy, and Mariella choose a charity or organization whose work directly benefits at-risk and underserved children. You can learn more about the Teddy Fund, Teddy, Natalie, at a link that I will provide in the show notes. It's a beautifully written article. I was so impressed when I read it, and it really touched my heart and choked me up, and I just have so much regard for Natalie, not only as in the work that she does now, but even understanding and knowing her why and her motivation behind some of the extended work that she does to benefit underserved children is very heartwarming. So let's go ahead and get right into the show. I'm dying for you to meet Natalie, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey, Natalie, welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast.
Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really happy you're on the show. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I think maybe the last time I saw you was at a Fancy meeting a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm really excited that we're going to be able to talk about the picky eating and these issues today because of your expertise in this area as well. It's going to be a really fun conversation.
Yeah, well, I think as you know, as a pediatrician and a registered dietitian, you know how painful picky eating is for families.
Yes. It's a source of a lot of stress.
And the pain or the painfulness of it never seems to end. So, but before we dig into picky eating, why don't you, in your words, tell the audience who you are and about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Natalie Muth, but I'm a pediatrician and registered dietitian. I practice pediatrics and run a healthy weight clinic in Carlsbad, California, where I work with kids and families across all age spectrum, really, and helping them to optimize their overall health and nutrition, physical activity, in addition to all the things that we work on as parents and helping parents to help their children grow up and thrive and have a really successful childhood and future. My interests really are, well, they're fairly broad, but really have a lot of focus and a longstanding interest in being able to kind of merge nutrition and pediatrics and kind of parenting together, because we know that nutrition plays such an important role as kids are growing up. And, some of it's personal background experience too. As a child, I really struggled a lot with eating healthy, and I struggled a lot with my weight and things, and really have come a long way in the process, and want to help others as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you have a specific program for healthy weight, which is awesome. Do you have a pretty vibrant participation in that program, or?
Yeah, it's in a pilot program phase. So I'm very lucky. The group that I work in, we're single specialty pediatrics, but we're fairly large and have several offices throughout San Diego County. So with that, I've been able to kind of have a best practice kind of clinic that a lot of the other offices will refer patients to really try to implement as much as possible what we know from the science is most effective at helping kids and families to achieve a healthy weight. So I get a lot of referrals because we know that this is an issue that affects a lot of people, and I'm kind of located in the community rather than patients having to travel a long ways away to get that extra supports. And then having the background in pediatrics and in dietetics, I'm able to kind of merge the two and have a fairly intensive program with pretty good outcomes for the patients. Mm-hmm. But I'm really excited, actually, that I'm trying a new phase of my pilot with a group where I'm leading a walk once a week called Walk with the Doc, which is in other communities where I've taken initially all the visits were kind of one-on-one with families. And now what I've found, there's benefit to one-on-one, and there's also benefit to groups. And so we have a program that I run, Walk with the Doc, in the park that's located across the street from my office, where every Thursday I'm there with whoever wants to come from 4 to 5. And we walk for the first 45 minutes or so, but then the last 15, 20 minutes, we do kind of skill building practice around nutrition or other topics that are relevant, like mindfulness, healthy relationship with food, and things like that.
Very cool. That's awesome.
It's really been cool. Really fun. Yeah. It's been cool.
So you are one busy lady. One of the things I always ask my guests is to sort of reflect back on their own childhood and eating and food, and think about how that affects who you are today, maybe even, your career choice, and how you approach, if you have children, how you approach food and feeding with your own children or in your practice. So that's the first question I ask almost all of my guests.
Yeah, my whole career path, I think, happened kind of in response to experiences I had as a kid around kind of health and healthy eating. So I grew up in a fairly small town where my family owned the local grocery store. And you would think if your family owns the grocery store, then you would get lots of access to really healthy foods and eat well. But really for us, that meant we got access to lots of the outdated foods and the dented cans and things that they, couldn't sell anymore. And they came to my house. So it's kind of funny. And my mom, was a really great example of a working mom, and she did not work in the store, and she cooked for us some great meals, but they happened like once a month where she'd cook these great meals, and the rest of the time we kind of scrapped together what we could and ate, and I'd say not that great. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I struggled with my weight a lot for a long time, in kind of elementary school and kind of going into middle school. And then my sister got pretty interested in nutrition, and I kind of came along with that and started to get really interested in what did it mean to eat healthy? And, oh, wait, this stuff I'm, eating TV dinners, several nights a week is probably not the best for me, or, maybe I shouldn't drink all that soda. And then it kind of just developed over time, and it kind of ended. Well, it didn't end, but it kind of started actually, where my mom and my mom has had some of her own kind of health concerns in this, around this area. we hiked the Grand Canyon together. We went all the way down and all the way out with the help of a trainer when I was in high school.
Oh,
and this was
wow.
a gigantic feat for both of us. My mom will never, she's now even amazed that she ever did it. But for me, it was like the starting point of, I was like, this is amazing. And wow, how far we've come. It inspired me to want to do more in fitness. And so I got involved in fitness in college, which got me into interest in nutrition and medicine. And so I kind of followed that path to where I am now as a pediatrician and registered dietitian. But my interest is so much in kids and families because we have such potential and such opportunity to really help from the very beginning kids to thrive. And if they're having challenges, to be able to address those early on so that we're not trying to change behaviors that have been in place for 30 years.
Right.
Although in the case of parents, maybe, but for the kids, we really can make small adjustments that make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I always say, the weight problems, whether it's underweight or overweight, they begin in the high chair with not only the food choice, but the feeding interactions and just, the nutrition knowledge level. And there's just so much that goes into it. And, which reminds me, I think we actually sat on the AAP board when we were talking about or helping them develop the healthy weight project for the pregnancy and infant section, right?
Exactly, we did. When you're saying it starts in the high chair, I was thinking, it starts in the high chair, but it starts even before the high chair, kind of negative 9 months of life, right? And that's what our meeting was about, that we were last together, is really how things very early on can set the stage for the future when it comes to lots of things, but especially nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what always has struck me as quite a challenge is, and I have 3 daughters who are young adults or teenagers. And boy, if young adults and teenagers don't value nutrition and healthy living and activity, it's nearly impossible to convince them or to influence them when they're pregnant.
Right. Yeah. And when it's such an important time for the mom, but also for the baby. But, I do find in a lot of cases, it's a great opportunity in pregnancy as well, because we as parents tend to put our kids first. And I think that starts from in utero too. And a lot of moms are willing to make changes to their own lifestyle when they know how much it can impact their child.
Yeah, exactly. So you're really busy. And the only other question I wanted to quickly ask you is which came first, the medical degree or the RD?
Oh, yeah.
Or did you do them both at the same time, which would have been amazing?
No. My thinking in college, so I was getting done and I knew I was interested in nutrition, and I was also planning to go to medical school. And I made the conscious decision that I wanted to do my nutrition training first, which I did as part of a joint Master of Public Health and Nutrition program, because I wanted to have that perspective going through what I knew would be a very disease-focused, organ by organ focused experience throughout medical school and training. I wanted to have that broader perspective. And I'm so glad that I did, because I was able to build on my nutrition knowledge and my public health knowledge throughout medical school and have that perspective all the way along, which I think has influenced how I practice medicine and how I engage with families and in the community and kind of on the larger level as well.
That's great. That's great. Well, and also I think medical school doesn't usually house very much in the nutrition area, right? In terms of the education around nutrition. You were probably ahead of your class.
Oh, yeah. I was having the nutrition background was really, I went to the University of North Carolina, which has a great for public health school and for medical school. And so there is a great nutrition department through the School of Public Health that does interact with the medical school. So there was a couple of areas, your brief few hours of nutrition you got in med school, that was more than most people get in medical school. But I certainly had a lot broader perspective, and it gave me a lot of opportunity too, because my colleagues knew that I had the background in nutrition. So I was able to kind of influence them as they're going through their medical school training as well, and being able to bring some more nutrition and public health into some of the experiences we had. Like, for example, a colleague and I who had been a teacher prior to med school developed a nutrition and activity program that was led by teens and delivered to elementary school kids in the community down the street from our med school. And we really got the hands-on practice of the skills we had before med school in a way that was kind of unique and pretty fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it. So you've had a great career, and you just came out with a book fairly recently called The Picky Eater Project, and you co-authored that with Sally Sampson, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And so let's talk about picky eating, because I know that personally, I could probably do a podcast on the topic of picky eating every week, and people would be delighted to hear it. The topic never gets old. But where I want to go in this conversation with you is really just to understand the process of dealing with the issue of picky eaters for parents. And first off, in your experience and in the experience of writing the book and doing all the research, but really it's probably more the practical experience of the patients that you see day in and day out. What do you find are the most challenging issues for parents who have a picky eater?
Yeah, picky eating is very stressful for parents, and for many parents. And I think part of it is because we have this idea of, especially if you're a parent who's very interested in nutrition and is very devoted to helping your kids eat in a healthy way, we have this idea that it's our responsibility to make sure our kids eat well. And when we're trying to do that and creating, a meal or situation so that our kids will be healthy eaters, and then they're refusing it, it's very stressful because, one, we feel like as a parent, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're being told by the doctors and the dietitians and everybody, like, make sure your kid eats 5 fruits and vegetables a day, and you're trying and your kid is not eating 5 fruits and vegetables a day, but not for any lack of effort on the parent's part.
Right.
They start to get more stressed, and then it starts to be pressuring the kid to eat. And then the kid is a very psychological being, is like, oh, you're going to pressure me, I'm going to even push you away even more. And then it's this battle. And so there's this conflict between a parent and a kid, like every mealtime, and it just makes meals stressful. And so some parents respond to that by saying, like, okay, I just want to make sure the kid eats. I don't care what it is the kid eats, but I can't let my kid be malnourished and not eat anything. And so then they go the other way and are like, okay, just give them whatever they'll eat. And I don't want them to starve. And then all of a sudden the parents are like making all these separate meals, and the kid is just eating macaroni and cheese and pizza. And then it's just like, gets to a point where parents like, wow, all my kid eats is pizza. Now what do I do? And so there's like all this anxiety around food that parents just get to the point of being really frustrated and not being sure, in many cases, not being sure what to do next or what's the right answer here, where they're trying everything, but it seems like nothing's working. It's just getting worse.
Right, right. And they get themselves backed into a corner, basically, where they're stuck. They're stuck and they don't know how to get out. Kids are eating the same old stuff every day. And even though they try to introduce variety or a fruit or a vegetable, at this point, the child knows that he'll get what he wants. So why bother trying?
Exactly. Right. And then it gets to the point where I'll often have these conversations with families and start to talk about which we most all, suggest to families that, okay, it's shared control. We want to, as a parent, we can't control everything our child puts in their mouth, but we can control certain things. So we want to make sure that we've got, family meal times. We want to sit at the table to eat. We want to schedule when the meals happen. And then as parents, we decide what's in the house and what we're going to offer to the kids, but then letting the kids decide, what they're going to eat and how much. So that's our standard recommendation, at least kind of starting off. But once parents, I find, are in this period of like stress around this conflicting, like, yeah, I want my kid to eat healthy, but when they freeze to, I can't let them starve. And then it's really hard for many families, it's really hard to be firm with like, okay, I'm going to do this. And if my child doesn't want to eat this food, I'm going to be okay because it's a process. And I'm going to believe what they're telling me that eventually a hungry child will eat, which almost always works. Although, we'll probably get to this, but there's certain situations if a child's very underweight or food allergies, things like that, where we have to kind of take a little bit different approach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious, in your practice or in the kids' families that you work with, what percentage or what's the division between that typical picky eater toddler who's, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 versus, that older child who's picky, who's beyond sort of the normal phase or stage of picky eating, and it's become a much bigger issue?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I think most cases it's the 2-year-old, because it's shocking to parents, because we know that kids, the first 6 months or a year of eating solid food, so from 6 months until they're 18, 24 months, they actually like everything for the most part. But then when they get to be like 2, they don't want anything new. And so it's like shocking to parents, and they then see this pickiness coming out, and it's a difficult adjustment many times. So that's not the majority, but a lot of the kids and families I work with that are concerned about picky eating, it's around 2. And then it seems like there's another peak around 4 where you can get into a rut. Mm-hmm. With the older kids, it definitely has to be very patient. So I'm a pediatrician, so my patient is the child. Mm-hmm. So very patient centered and really exploring with the kid. And making sure that the child has a lot of chance to do a lot of the talking instead of the parent, to really try to understand what it is that's the hang up or the concern, and then what that child is willing to do or wants to try to, I always call it like training the taste buds. So we know it can take 15 to 20 tries to like something. A lot of kids, as they get older, like school age, they like experiments, they like science. So we talk about like let's do an experiment and let's just see what happens. And they're usually kind of okay with that. And they're like, what should our experiment be, or what should we try? And then kind of going from there to really figure out what's going on. And if we can't make progress there, definitely considering or thinking about, is there something more that's going on? Is there an allergy? Is there a food aversion? Is there some other, gastrointestinal concern going on? Like really trying to get to the root of the problem.
The picky eaters that I tend to work with, a few of them might be that typical toddler age, but I seem to be working more and more with kids that are more along the lines of ARFID, that avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And I do, taste bud training and new food trials, but in a very programmatic, systematic way. And, as you mentioned, the child has to be ready and willing to do any and all of this, because it really is on them. It's on their internal motivation to want to do this and to be at least be a participant in the program, because if they're refusing or resisting, it's never going to work. And that's where I think sometimes a healthcare professional can help parents, because I find that there's oftentimes a dynamic happening between the parent and child that really needs to have a third party come in to help change that dynamic between the parent and child. So if it is short order cooking, or it is rewarding to get the child to eat vegetables, or it is pushing too much, that the whole family benefits sometimes from just that third person coming in and saying, wait, we need to change this up. What you're doing isn't working. It's not benefiting your child. Your child isn't able to really maneuver in the right ways to help him grow in this area. And so that's where I find that I'm interacting with picky eaters the most these days. But those kids are older. They're like 6 and over. Right.
Yeah. And that makes sense also, just in the different practice environments that we work in. Because, I'm seeing it's not necessarily, the pickiness in many cases is not to the extent that a parent may not even like think it's that big of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes up in the context of a well child visit or, the questionnaire of like, do you have any concerns? Like, oh yeah, actually my kid's kind of picky. And then it's kind of exploring that more. But then when the kids are at that older age, they're in, middle elementary school or beyond, and it still is an issue. I think that point, a lot of parents are like, wait a second, we need to call in the experts. We need an intervention. But, in your point though, too, I think one thing that I think is really important for parents to kind of get their heads around is like control what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
Like work on the areas as a parent that you can work on as far as the food environment at home and
mm-hmm. family
meal times and what foods are available when they're offered, but then understand or be okay with the things that we can't necessarily control,
mm-hmm.
like what the child actually puts in their mouth of what you've got. Like if you're pressuring them or forcing them or really hovering, it's not going to make it more likely for that child to eat that food when the parent's not around as they get older and we're trying to teach them healthy habits for life.
Right.
But modeling, eating in a way that you want your kids to eat is actually quite powerful, and you don't have to say anything. They just pick up on it.
Which is so brilliant. And I bring that up all the time with my parents as well. It's like, you don't even have to say anything. In fact, it's probably a really good idea if you don't say anything.
Exactly.
Well, just do what you're supposed to do, and they'll learn that way. But a lot of times parents don't know what to do. So they don't know necessarily the path to take. So what would you hope that parents would learn, or some of your tips, suggestions about picky eating that's, managing it in a very productive way for the child by the parents?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I just always, I think I say it too much because some of my patients are like, I know it's a process, but I just constantly am reminding it's not going to be an overnight just thing that's going to just happen when you start with a change. It takes time, but with time, it does get better and your child will eat better. But first, it's starting out. I don't know if everyone or, how many parents realize this, but during that phase when kids are really interested, when they're babies, right? When they first start solid foods until they're 18 months, 24 months or so, they like everything. And it's a really great time to get those 15 exposures of all the, as many bitter vegetables as you can, or any food that you like to eat that's healthful that you want your child to eat. Like exposing them early and often will help to train the taste buds early on so that nothing's new by 2. So I say that a lot, nothing new by 2, other than junk food, because we don't want them to get junk food early on, but that's a different talk. And then that early exposure will help the kid to be less likely to refuse later. But then once they are, it's really like having a family meal. So one family, one meal. If you include something that everyone will like, it can help take some of the pressure off. But just like sitting down together, getting rid of the screens, having, a balanced meal that you've offered, whether the child eats in a balanced way or not, you can't control, but you can control what you offer them. And then just trying to like relax and have a nice meal together and not worry about what the child necessarily is putting in their mouth, but modeling the way you want them to eat. If we do that day in and day out, the kids get lots of exposure to those healthy things. When we're not looking is when they tend to try them. And that trying them is helping to kind of train their taste buds to like them. So it's just a day in, day out process is one thing that I try to, encourage families or parents to consider. Another thing for the 2-year-old kind of phase when they're getting that neophobia or not liking new things, 2-year-olds also get pretty interested when things are fun or things look fun. So you can actually get kids to be interested in trying foods by making it a little fun. So that could mean, whatever your toddler's favorite character is, getting a fruit or a mostly a fruit, or it could be a vegetable if it's soft enough and small enough, and putting it into a clear plastic baggie with stickers of their favorite character. And all of a sudden, it's a lot more fun to eat. Or we know 2-year-olds love dips. So if you're trying things with dip, they might be willing to try it. Or cooking together, especially as kids are getting older, we tend to taste what we're cooking. And so that's a good way to get some tries in, or growing your own herb garden, or any kind of fruits or plants or whatever that are edible. That's a fun way for kids to be interested in trying things that you don't have to pressure them, but they start to come around to liking those foods.
Right. Those are great tips. In terms of, writing the Picky Eater Project and doing your research and pulling things together, did you learn anything about picky eating that surprised you or not?
I don't know that there was something that sticks out right now as being a big surprise in the process of doing the research and kind of pulling the book together. Other than there wasn't I don't think, a huge surprise, but it was quite interesting. And there's emerging research around this that I thought was pretty fascinating about how flavors and tastes early on, even in the amniotic fluid, when a baby is, when a mom is pregnant still with a baby, what the mom eats that early on actually affects the amniotic fluid and the taste of it. And that can affect whether a child prefers a food or tries a food later on. So it just really reinforced the beginning end and the preventive side of it, that there's a lot that we can do to help families very early on, even from as early as pregnancy, to kind of train a child's taste buds for later on. So it's the amniotic fluid, and then of course the breast milk, what we're eating then, and then as we're introducing solids. So not that you can prevent every case of picky eating, because you can't, but I think families and parents knowing that there's a lot you can actually do before there's any even worry about picky eating is kind of interesting.
And then just to piggyback on that, so many parents feel like they've failed their child or they've done something wrong, and that's why they have a picky eater. But I always, too, like to remind people that there is a genetic component to picky eating, and we have research that informs us that, and I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but there is a certain percentage of picky eaters who come by it honestly. They come by it through the gene pool, and while that's already hardwired in there, parents, as you mentioned, can do so much to prevent it by, how they feed, what they choose to feed, what they eat in their maternal diet and their pregnancy diet, and all of those things.
Definitely. And there's, you mentioning that, I'm glad you did, because I have 2 kids. They're 9 and 6. And, I like to say I learned a lot between the 2 pregnancies, so that could have been a factor, but I don't think so. I think it actually is just the way that the kids are, that my older child, my son, is a little bit more hesitant around things, and he's a little bit less likely to just go, try something really new and be wanting to taste it. Whereas my daughter in our herb garden likes to make, basil and cilantro sandwiches, and she'll just eat that without anything else, just basil and cilantro. And like, what?
That's interesting. I'll have to try that.
Yeah, I know, it's bizarre, right? But they're very different in their preferences, but giving them really the same food environment. But I think if my son, he's come along great, and he does great now with being willing to try things. I think if we hadn't really been trying to practice, what I'm preaching, or putting into practice all the stuff I've learned from the research and everything, I think he would still be in a pretty significant rut with the food, but he's come along, but it's still a process. So every child is going to have some innate feelings about things. And some people, even after 20 tries, are never going to like a certain food.
Right.
But if we are still thinking about, okay, we want to create the environment to support healthy eating, we want to have family mealtimes are going to be a model, we're going to introduce but not pressure, eventually the kids come along in their own way, And at the end of the day, they're going to end up being healthier eaters than they would have been if we hadn't been consistently kind of practicing the method.
Right. I totally agree with that. Now, but that brings another question to my mind, which is, parents make mistakes unintentionally, most of the time unintentionally, around feeding their child. And so when a parent has a picky eater, what are some of the mistakes that you see a parent making?
Yeah, well, so we're all parents. We all make a lot of mistakes, lots of trial and error in this process, which is normal. I think one mistake I think some parents may make, especially as they're already, they've identified that picky eating is a concern to them, is they get stressed if it doesn't if the problem is not fixed quickly, and then just go back to the old way. And it really is a process, and it does take time. So the consistency of, it's okay to do what we discussed. It's okay to not make the separate meal. It's okay for that child to refuse dinner one night. They're not going to starve. We'll make sure of it. Okay. But it's a process, and it takes time. There's a lot of psychology, as we all know, to parenting, and parents feel guilt on a lot of things. And I think a lot of parents feel a lot of guilt when a child doesn't eat, and the child knows that. And so a lot of times they're using that to their advantage. And so it's really a process, the parents to be kind of firm in being the parent, calling the shots, but setting the stage so that the child has some choices and some feeling of control, but not letting the child run all over the parents and be demanding. The parent says no, the child's more demanding, the parent gives in. Then the child learns that all they have to do is escalate for a little longer, and they'll get what they want. And then it becomes even more stressful, and the problem becomes even more difficult.
Yeah. I've seen parents who just want to avoid the drama. And so because the child has learned how to escalate and how to make the family dinner hour just absolutely miserable. And and sometimes and you probably, I'm sure you're doing this all the time, but I do feel like sometimes I'm having to help parents flex their parenting muscle, to strengthen it and to flex it and use it, and address the fears. And when you have a picky eater, those fears are real. The fear of your child starving, and or the fear of not even maybe starving, but the fear that your child goes to bed and he's up at 3 a.m. starving, and he's going to wake the whole house up. That's probably the more practical fear that a lot of parents feel. Or the picky eater who is underweight, which that's not a large percentage of picky eaters these days. Most picky eaters that I see, and what I've seen in the research, is that they tend to be normal weight, and even some are overweight. But if you do have a picky eater who's underweight, that fear that that something, they're going to fall ill or be malnourished, or, you're going to be neglectful as the parent because you haven't fed them and you're contributing to the underweight. I mean, there's just a whole lot of, psychology, as you said, and guilt and fear, and sometimes, reassuring parents what it takes to parent, and that it's okay to parent. That's the other thing. I'm always saying it's okay for natural consequences to occur.
Right. Exactly. And in the case of the child who is overweight or is perceived to be, who is underweight or perceived to be underweight, the pediatrician and the whole team of professionals that a pediatrician can help a family access, like a dietitian or occupational therapist or whomever, can be really helpful if there is truly underweight and if it truly is related to the pickiness. Then I encourage parents to go to the pediatrician. Let's get the height, weight, BMI checked. Let's figure out what's going on, and let's get you some help, some backup, so you're not doing this on your own and being worried, but that you're doing it with the help of a team that can really make sure your child is still going to thrive and do great and be able to work through the pickiness.
Mm-hmm. Great. So in terms of the book, The Picky Eater Project, what do you hope parents will be able to learn and take away from that book?
Yeah, so the Picky Eater Project, which so Sally, my co-author, is also the founder of Chop Chop Kids Cooking Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very fun and really practical approach to help families who are concerned about a child who's a picky eater to work through it. In fact, it's a 6-week kind of a plan to do that and to really implement some of the suggestions or what the science tells us is most effective to undo the picky eating. So what I hope that people who kind of go through the experience will get out of it is, one, there'll be a lot less stress at home around mealtimes, mm-hmm. and there'll be a process in place and a strategy that helps both the parents to feel good about their parenting and the food environment that they've got for their kids, and then for the kids to have fun with it and feel excited about helping to make new foods or potentially even to try new things. And as they kind of train their taste buds or have these experiences, they become more willing over time to give new flavors a try and to realize that, oh, that one thing that I keep saying I don't like that I've actually never tasted, mm-hmm. I've actually tasted it now and I kind of like it. Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. And the book kind of goes through a family that did the Picky Eater Project. And that was an experience that those kids had a couple of times because, you know, kids who can be a little bit more selective in their eating tend to be a little bit more hesitant to try, and they just assume they don't like something.
Right.
But we can have a fun experience to see that may not actually be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I tell my clients all the time, and these are the ones that have extreme picky eating, is that, you know, your brain is telling you that you don't like this, but it's really your tongue that makes the decision about whether you like something or not. So don't trust your brain, trust your tongue. And your tongue can only tell you that if it actually has that food on it.
Exactly. And to extend upon that too, it's the tongue that has the taste buds. So even if you taste it on your tongue, but don't end up chewing and swallowing it necessarily, mm-hmm. you still got an exposure. And so you still got, you know, one check in your 15 to 20 tries of coming mm-hmm. along to seeing how your taste buds on your tongue might change.
Yeah, I definitely. And that's a point to just even drive home to the listeners. Tasting is not eating. Eating is chewing and swallowing or consuming, but tasting is anything from, you know, kissing, licking, putting the food on your tongue and spitting it out, chewing it, spitting it out, but eating is actually swallowing it. So there's a big differentiation. There's a lot of leeway, I think, to work with when you have a picky eater like that. So it's great that you included that in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So parents can take your book and can go through step by step a process to help their child overcome picky eating.
Exactly. They're not alone. And the 6-week journey kind of helps to see that and helps to show parents what you can, like, control what you can. Here are things that you can control and watch what unfolds as you do that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Awesome. So Natalie, what are you working on now? Do you have anything in the works? Other than your busy life with kids and a practice and healthy weight project?
I'm kind of in pause mode right now and just enjoying spending time with my family right now and you know, my pediatrics practice and growing my well clinic is what I call it at my office. So mm-hmm. I'm kind of between projects otherwise, but really enjoying the time kind of one-on-one with my patients and also with my kids and practicing some stuff with them.
Mm-hmm. I love being on pause. I need to do that.
That's where you get your best ideas, right? When you just sit back a little bit and just kind of pause for a while.
So true. So true. So where can my listeners find you if they want to look you up, check out your book, all that good stuff?
Yeah, the best place to go is my website, which is just Dr. Natalie Muth, muth.com. And my Twitter handle is @Dr. Natalie Muth if you're on Twitter. And Facebook, I manage How to Raise Healthy Eaters is my Facebook page. So it's just facebook.com/How to Raise Healthy Eaters.
Awesome. Great. So thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on the Nourished Child podcast. I know you're a super busy lady, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge about picky eating with my listeners.
Jill, thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.
You bet. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Natalie. Picky eating can certainly be challenging, but for many families, it is part and parcel to moving through the toddler and preschool years. Of course, sometimes it's not your garden variety picky eating, and it is more, it's deeper, it's more broad, and families will need more help. So next on the Nourished Child podcast, I'll be chatting with Melanie Potok, who's a feeding therapist, about ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or what is commonly known as extreme picky eating. So make sure you tune in next time so you can get the down low on that topic. Now, I just want to mention a few links. I will include the Picky Eater Project book link in the show notes, as well as a few Picky Eater articles that I've written on my blog and the book Try New Food, how to help new eaters, picky eaters, and extreme picky eaters taste, like, and eat new food. As always, you can find the show notes for today's show at jillcastle.com/043. You can also write a review on iTunes. I love it when I see reviews of the show. They are few and far between and hard to come by, so if you like this show, I'd love it if you showed me some love. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Android, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, Tuned In, and more. The links are on the show notes. You can share the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you hang out. If you haven't joined my email newsletter, you can do so. I'll include the link in the show notes, but it's jillcastle.com is exactly where you can find on the front page a button where you can sign up for the newsletter. As always, thanks for joining me today. I'm so very glad that you chose to spend some time with me. Please be sure to give your child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.